a side-scrolling RPG isn't really a common mixture for a game. Then again, Child of Light isn't the typical game. But the game devs at Ubisoft Montreal did a great job of turning this odd mixture into a fun game. One of the things that really stood out to us right away was probably something you've already noticed: the great stylization. When you first launch Child of Light, right away you're hit with the beautiful artwork that's really pretty consistent throughout most of the game. It's obvious that a ton of work went into the environment design for this game, and it really pays off. We love the wide range of environments in the game, both indoor and outdoor. While most side scrollers can have a tendency of feeling like a very small world due to the restriction of really only being able to move side to side, the devs did a great job helping Child of Light feel like it's much more open than it is. For example, notice the giant in the background of this shot here really helps give you a feeling that there's stuff going on behind you. There's a ton of different levels that the devs added into each area that really give the game a nice sense of depth. By levels, not really talking about game levels, but more like Z depth. Now, in this one area alone, you've got trees in the foreground, the waterfall, the actual environment that your character is interacting with. And then beyond that, there's even more layers of waterfalls, statues, hills in the background, clouds above, and so on and so on. All of that artistic detail really gives Child of Light a great level of depth that isn't really found in a lot of other side scrollers. Now, the level design was also really well thought out. As the story progresses, your character gets the ability to fly, and it's really cool to see that the game devs took the time to not only give those extra abilities, but take advantage of those abilities in different ways. For example, once you can fly, it's almost like there's a whole new level that's open up to you, as you can reach treetops to find hidden treasures, like you can see in this shot, or even be able to really just avoid enemy fights by flying over them, like you can see here. But then again, not every fight really makes much sense. So here you can see we're going into a battle with a hyena-like character on the ground. That takes us into the battleground where we're facing off with two hyena-like characters standing on two of the 5 stone areas. Kind of makes sense, right? But then there are other times, like you can see in this shot here, where we're going to fly up to attack a spider hanging from a thread. When we go into the battleground, for some reason, those same hyena-like characters were apparently hanging out with the spider up in the air, so we get to fight those as well. Little things like that don't really make much sense, and it can take the player out of the gameplay. Since we're talking about the battles, another thing we would have really liked to have seen done better were the battlegrounds themselves. Maybe because we were spoiled by the beautiful artwork around the battles. As you can see in these various battles here, when you go into a battle, it's almost always the exact same scenario. There's up to 5 characters, 2 on your team, up to 3 enemies, standing on 5 different areas. With such a great fighting system that they developed for Child of Light, you end up spending a lot of time in these battlegrounds. Because of that, it really could have gone a long way to differentiate between some of the battlegrounds with more than just different but very, very similar imagery. Like maybe try not having every character standing on their own island. Oh, and we loved how the principles of animation were incorporated into the fighting animations, specifically on Aurora. That's the main character when she's carrying and swinging a sword that's obviously way too heavy for her. Watch how she lifts the sword after winning the battle, then drops it down and almost falls down with it. It's great. Another area that we thought could have used a little more variation were the puzzles. While they're not all this way, most of the puzzles seem to be basically the same. You shine the light onto something to unlock something else. After doing a puzzle once, the challenge of the puzzle really goes away, and then it just gets to be repetitive, doing what amounts to the same puzzle over and over. Fortunately, not every single puzzle was that way, but there was enough of them that it got very repetitive very quickly. While we loved the overall stylization of the artwork in this game, one thing that probably had a negative effect from what it was intended were a lot of the cutscenes. So here's an example of a dialogue cutscene. Now, I know in this video you can't hear the audio from the game itself, but don't worry, you're not missing anything. Notice the text below? That's all there is to the conversation. There's no actual voices. So a lot of the story progresses through cutscenes like this that you have to read. Not only can these conversations get a little bit difficult to follow at times when you switch between more than 2 characters, like you can see here, but from a technical perspective, the animations aren't nearly as good as anywhere else in the game. Like the way Aurora's hair always flows exactly the same way in every cutscene. It's a far cry from the beautiful flowing hair that she has in actual gameplay. Or the fact that most of the characters don't have any sort of facial animation, and when they do, it's really, really rough, like you can see here. We almost would have preferred to have seen this whole cutscene style interaction go away and have the characters interact sort of like they do elsewhere throughout the game, like in this shot where you can see Aurora's having a conversation with her little firefly sidekick, and for some reason, a crow with a top hat. Now, anytime you're developing a game, there's always going to be decisions that you'll need to make that can potentially have negative effects on the gameplay. And as you've probably noticed by now, most of the issues that we came across in Child of Light weren't really technical glitches or bugs or anything like that, but were probably conscious and perhaps even stylized decisions that ended up having some negative effects on the gameplay. But even with those, as you can see from what we've looked at throughout this entire video, the game is still amazingly beautiful and artistically very, very well done. While other games might be affected more by these types of issues, Child of Light is so heavily stylized that as an artist, you're bound to overlook a lot of the little things that we talked about in this video as you're gazing at the beautiful imagery throughout the entire game. If you haven't already, be sure to add us on Xbox Live or the PlayStation Network using the gamertag Digital-Tutors, and we'll see you online.